this year. Amen. Genesis 18:32 says, "And he said, O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake." I will not destroy it for 10's sake. I want to talk to you today on the subject of God begins where you stop. God begins where you stop. Lord, I ask you in this house today, Lord, minister to every heart that is here and open each and every one of our minds to receive from this word, God, what you have planned and what you have desired for us to hear, God. Speak to us in this house today. We love you and worship you and thank you for all that you have done. Touch us, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Abraham was a very special man. He had God, the physical voice of God, come down and call him to go and to follow him. It says in Genesis chapter 12 in verse 1, it says, "Now the Lord said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee." We do not know why God called Abraham. There's nothing in the scriptures that gives a declaration of what God saw in Abraham, what Abraham was like, or anything really about Abraham. There's really not much there that we can see why God made the decision on choosing Abraham to call him out and to create a nation from him. We just know that God selected him and that Abraham obeyed God. Abraham left his country. Now we read that, and that's a factual a word that we read in the Bible, but we really don't understand what that entailed for Abraham. You have to understand, when Abraham left his country, it's like God calling out to Scott and Amanda and saying, it's time for you to go. And you're going to leave your family, you're going to leave everybody that you know, you're going to leave everything that you know to be normal in your life. And the fact of that matter is that you're never going to go back to see them again. They're a part of your history. You're not going back to the place that God called you from. You're going to go out and you're going to create a life that is all your own. It's going to be a place that is all your own. And so it's not an easy thing for Abraham just to decide to go ahead and do this. This was a sacrifice for Abraham and Abraham's wife, Sarah. It was a sacrifice for both of them to go ahead and do this. You see, Abraham had to learn about God. He really did not know God. He didn't know really anything about God. There's no real record in the Bible that we read of how Abraham and God got acquainted. No real storyline there about the years that they discussed this, or conversations that they may have had, or whatever it might have been. There's really no real understanding about how that they got that. The preceding chapter 11 does not shed any light on the relationship that God had with Abraham or any of his forefathers. There's nothing there. Just one day God calls Abraham. There's simply a listing of the family tree of Abraham. So there's really not much that we can ascertain of how Abraham built a relationship with God. We cannot see that there's any knowledge of God by any of the predecessors of Abraham. We can speculate that they knew of him because there is an innate part of each and every one of us that realizes and recognizes that there is a God. But to know him personally, there's nothing there. We don't see any connection between the history of Abraham and God at all. What Abraham knew of God, he learned through the times that he spoke to God and that God spoke to him, and the times that God did things in his life. That is how Abraham got to know God. And so somehow, somewhere in his life, there was an impression in Abraham and a confidence that was built in him and a trust that was built in him of God. Somehow that got built. The reality of it is it doesn't happen at the very beginning. It is something that grows and progresses. And so in verse 2 of chapter 12, it states that in the call of Abraham, that God made a promise to Abraham. He said, "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." Now Abraham knew that the call that God had on him was a promise that he would have a great family, a big family, as the stars of the sky, as the sands of the seas. God had promised to Abraham that he would make him a great family. But Abraham had no children at the time of the promise. This was something that Abraham hoped for. This is something that he desired would happen, but it had not yet happened for him. So Abraham had to learn about the promises of God. Abraham learned that God would enlarge his land, not only build him a great family, but would enlarge his land. So Abraham traveled to the country of Canaan, and there God promised to Abraham a country. It says, "And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. Unto your seed will I give this land. Wherever you walk, Abraham, wherever your foot touches, that land will be yours." How would you like to have that promise that God says, "I want you to go to a foreign place, and wherever your feet tread, wherever you go, I'm going to give that land to you"? I would love that. My friend, I would have walked both sides of the Kenai River and all along the front of the ocean. What a homesteading plan. To have all of the land that God said, wherever your feet go, wherever your feet tread, that land, all of that land, I'm going to give it to you. And so Abraham traveled all around Canaan. That was the promise that God gave to him. That was his. So Abraham learned that God was serious about protecting him as well. He learned that God would enlarge him, that God would give him a land, and that God would protect him. So he goes to Egypt. He gets into Egypt. And he's afraid for his life. He hasn't yet really learned to trust God to protect him in dangerous situations. So he makes a covenant with his wife and says, "Tell everybody you're my sister. Let everybody know you're my sister." And so they go into Egypt and they tell everybody that Abraham and Sarah are brother and sister. And the king takes Sarah as his wife, as one of his wives. And it says, "And the king took Abraham his wife as his own." Abraham found out that God would not tolerate anyone messing with him. Whether they were deceived or not, God would not tolerate anyone messing with Abraham and his wife whatsoever. And it says, "And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with a great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." God said, "Don't you mess with that woman. Don't you spend time with that woman whatsoever. Don't you go around that man. Don't you go around that woman." And God plagued his entire household. What that plague was, I don't know. But God said, "You're not going to mess with this woman, and you're not going to mess with this man." You see, Abraham learned that wherever he went and whatever he did, the hand of God would watch over him, and the hand of God would protect him. Abraham found out that God would bless his finances. It says, "And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together." That's talking of Lot and Abraham. God blessed Abraham so much that he had so many possessions that even a great country area could not sustain both him and Lot. That is a great blessing of God. God overwhelmed him with his blessings of his finances, and he had to split company with Lot because they could not dwell together anymore. All that they had been blessed with, was growing so rapidly and so much that they had to split. Abraham found out that God would supply every need that he had for him and his family. Abraham found out that God would deliver him and his family. God would be their deliverer. Lot went down to the land and a king came in and captured the city that Lot was living in. He was taken captive by this army. So this great army goes in and invades this city and takes all of the people away. It says, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. And he divided himself against them and his servants by night, and smote them and pursued them into Hobah, which is on the left of Damascus. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. What an entire kingdom could not do. What an entire walled city and kingdom with fortified armaments and all of that thing could not do, in that another king could overtake that. Abram, with 315 of his own men, went and overtook that army. That army that overtook an entire kingdom, 315 men, overtakes them. That tells me that the power of God was with Abraham. That whatsoever it is that you desire to do, Abraham, I will be with you. I will set my hand about you. I will watch over you. You are my son, and I will protect you. I will deliver you in your time of need. I am with you. I am with you. Among all the time that Abraham had with God, there was a trust and an understanding of the nature of God that was being built in Abraham. He began to understand what God was like. He began to see the underlying principles upon which God acted. There were principles that God had that he acted upon, and Abraham began to understand those principles. Abram was approached by God, and he was told that God was soon to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. The sins of these two cities had reached a breaking point with God, and the time of judgment had come, that God was going to judge these cities, and that the cities and the inhabitants inside this city, all of them were about to be destroyed. Right. And this concerned Abraham. This was very concerning to Abraham. Abraham seemed to be concerned with the honor of God. If in the judgment of God, the wicked and the righteous were involved, then God's justice was going to be violated. If God's judgment fell upon the righteous as it fell upon the wicked, then the justice of God would be violated. How can God judge the just and condemn the just among the wicked? What if there were 50 righteous in the city, God? What if there were 50 righteous? It concerned Abraham that the righteousness of God would be destroyed. God, wouldn't it be right to save the city if there were just 50 people that were righteous in the city? God, would it be just to destroy the 50 people among the many? And so Abraham spoke with God about this. God revealed his plan that he had for the city, so that Abraham felt compelled to talk to God about it. There was a burden in the heart of Abram for the people of the city. He felt the need that he was going to be the intercessor for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. God, could I stand in the gap today? God, could I be the intercessor for the souls of the people that are bound for judgment today? God, you're about to judge two cities, and you're about to call them into condemnation. You're about to destroy the people of these cities. But oh God, could I stand as an intercessor before your throne today? And could I stand before you, oh God, in judgment of these people and intercede on behalf of these people, that you might spare the city, oh God, that there might be some righteous among them, oh God. Could I be the intercessor? There was a passion in the heart of Abram. There was a desire in the heart of Abram. God, please don't judge the city. Peradventure there be 50 righteous in the city. Could I just speak to you for a moment, God? Would you hold for just a second, God, that we could discuss this? You see, Abraham used a principle that he understood, that he had learned about God in his discussion with God on this subject. There was something in the past relationships with God that revealed to Abraham the nature, a principle about God. What he knew of the principle of God was that God would spare the righteous from his judgment. He understood, he learned that God will not judge the righteous with the wicked, that he will always spare the righteous from the judgment of the wicked. This was an unbreakable principle of God. Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? The answer of God was yes. I'll spare the city. I'll spare the city. You asked, you pled with me upon the understanding of my nature and upon the principles that I have, that I will not destroy the righteous with the wicked. You came to me and you based your argument upon a principle that is mine. And because of that principle, because I am just, because I am righteous, I will not judge the righteous with the wicked. Therefore, if there be 50 in the city, I will not destroy the cities. You have become an intercessor for the cities. You have been successful in your intercessory before me. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy the city for lack of 5? Abram reasoned that the nature and the principles of God were unchanging. They are unchanging. If there were 5 less, God, if there were just 5 less people, would your nature change, God? Would you judge the righteous for only 5 less, God? Would your nature change and you void your nature, God? Would it change if there were just 5 people less? Abram replied that he applied the understanding that he had of God and his principles, and he bargained for 45. How about if there were fewer than 45, God? 40. Will you judge the cities for 40? I will not judge the cities for 40. Oh God, hear my plea again before you, oh God. Would your nature change if there were 5 less than 40? Would your nature change? Would you still judge the cities, God, if there were only 35? I will abstain my justice. I will abstain my judgment upon that place for 35. But God, if there were only 5 less than that, God, would that change your nature? Would you judge the people, God? Would you judge the righteous if there were only 30? Or how about 25? Or now he has brought God down from the original 50 to below half. God, if there were only 20, God, if there were only 20, would you judge the city? I won't judge the city for 20. I will not bring my judgment if there were only 20. Chapter 18, verses 31. And I will not destroy it for 20's sake. How about 10? God, how about 10? Will you stay your judgment for 10 people? And God looked at Abraham and he said, my principles remain unchanging. My principles upon which I act never change. They never change. And so for 10 souls, I will spare the city, Abram. For 10 souls, I will spare the city. And here we see Abram stopped. I started at 50, and out of 2 large cities, certainly there would be 50. Certainly there would be 50 righteous in 2 large cities. But just in case, I have taken God at his own principle, and I have whittled the number down from 50 to 10. I have stood in the gap before God. I have interceded before the throne of God for 2 very large cities, that if there should be 50, I have brought it down to 10. Surely there are 10 people in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. But this is a place that Abraham would not go past. This is a place that he would not peradventure go beyond. This is a place that Abraham said, I've asked enough of God. This is a place that Abraham felt that he was pushing God a little too far. That to go any more, there would just be, it seemed to be more than he felt comfortable asking before the throne of God. I have really worked God to this position. I have really impositioned God to get him to this place. And I know his justice and I know his nature, but I feel that I push God to the limit of his mercy and I push God to the limit of his judgments. And so I will not take God beyond this point. And I will not ask of God any more than I have just asked of him at this point. Abram, you're standing as a mediator between the judgment of God and the souls of a city. You're bargaining that God would save that city. And you're pleading the justice and the mercy of God. You're arguing his mercy before his throne. And the balances, in the balances, are the souls of two very large cities. How far will you go, Abraham, for these cities? How far will you ask God for these two cities? How far do you think God will go? How far do you think you can take him down? How far? My friend, where you stop, the point where you feel that you've asked so much of God and too much that you couldn't ask another thing, where you stop is where God begins. 1833, and the Lord went his way, and as soon as he had communed with Abram. What would God do now? We're at 10 people. We're at 10 people. Abraham, you left at 10 people. What is God going to do where you stopped at 10? The principle for us tonight is that where you leave off is where you stop, in the line that you draw in the sand. That very line that you place right here that says, this is where I'm going to stop. That place that you're afraid to ask for more from God. That place that you're afraid to go before the throne and you're afraid to even petition God for these things. The things that you wouldn't even dream about asking of God. The place where you stop. The place where you think that's beyond what you ever ought to ask of God. That's the place where God begins in your life. That's the place where God does things in your life that are beyond your comprehension and beyond your ability to understand. Abraham used the principles of God to go from 50 to 10. God will go beyond what you are daring to ask of God. God, I went down to 10, but God says, I'm not going to stop at just 10. I'll go down to 1. And so you see in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, you see the hand of God move as he goes into a city. And there was a judgment that was to come upon the city. And God said, you stopped at 10, but I'll go below 10. I'll go below where you would even dare to ask of me. And I'll do above and beyond what you ever asked of me. And I'll bring out 4 from the city. I'll bring out just 4. You wouldn't go down to 5. I'll go below 5. I'll do what you wouldn't even dare ask of me to do. I'll go beyond it. The line that you drew in the sand, the place that you were afraid to go beyond in asking me, I'm going to do that for you. I'm going to cause that to come to pass in your life. The principles of God stand forever. They stand forever. Do you understand that? The principles of God stand forever. Mercy. Where you think the mercy of God won't go, that's where the mercy of God begins. God, I've messed up too many times. God, I have made a mess of my life and I've done things that I should not do. The times that we stand in the presence of God and we look at our lives and we look at the things that we have done, God says, well, the thing that you are afraid to ask of me, the thing that you are afraid to go before my throne because you think it's too much to ask of me, God says that line that you drew in the sand is not a line to be me, I'll go beyond it. I'll reach to the inner side of you, and I'll bring you mercy where you didn't think I could bring mercy. There are people in the city today that are walking around that do not know and do not understand the mercy of God, and they think that all they are bound for is judgment, and they wouldn't even dream going before the presence of God and asking for mercy. But where you draw the line is where God begins His work. That's where God says, you haven't touched the extent of my mercy. Right. Giving. I have a need in my life again. I'm in need of help financially. I got things that are going on, God. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do with these bills. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do with these issues that are in my life. I've just lost my job. I don't know where I'm going to go. I don't know what I'm going to do. We look at God and we say, God, could you just provide for me just this little bit? Could I just have just enough to meet these bills? Could I have just enough to take care of these situations in my life? You see, when I was a young man, I did not want a lot from God. I asked God for two things in my life. I wanted to get married and I wanted to have children. That's all I cared about. I wanted to be a dad. It was the most important thing to me in my life. But everything else that I dared not ask God for, I dared not ask Him for a job. I dared not ask Him for anything else. God went beyond that, and He gave me the things that I didn't even dare ask of Him. You see, the love and the mercy of God, where you stop asking is where God begins to do the work in your life. You need deliverance. You've been oppressed by things. You've had situations in your heart and in your mind where it feels like you've got this oppressive spirit that is upon you. You feel like you just can't overcome an obstacle. You can't overcome something that has been oppressing you. You feel like that you wouldn't even dare ask God that God would heal you or deliver you from the situation. You wouldn't even dare go before the throne of God and ask Him to help you in that situation. My God is a deliverer. My God will come into your life, and my God will deliver you from the things that have been oppressing you. You've been dealing with frustrations, and you've been dealing with issues. You've been dealing with depression. You've been dealing with oppression. I'm not talking to this church today, but there's somebody that's going to hear this tape ministry on the internet, and I want to let you know that the things that you have been afraid to ask of God for deliverance for, God is going to deliver you. If you will only open your heart, if you will only open your spirit unto Him, God is about to do a great thing. The thing that you're afraid to draw the line in the sand and ask God for, God will go beyond what you ever dreamed that He would do. David said it this way. He said, the Lord is my rock and my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation, my high tower. I cannot tell you how many times I have gone to God in the midst of trouble in my life, and I have found a sanctuary. I only wanted God to help me with this little thing. I only wanted God to give me peace for a day. And what I found was so much better than anything I'd ever dreamed of. God is a redeemer. He's a redeemer. You got a lost son. You got a lost loved one. You got somebody that's gone back and gone away from this truth. You got somebody that you've been reaching out to. You're just asking, oh God, would you just do this little thing for me? Would you just reach in this little... I wouldn't dare ask God that you would call them into the ministry. I wouldn't dare ask God that you would move upon them to do these things or those things. I wouldn't dare ask God for these things. I would only ask of God that you would simply begin to deal with their heart. That's all I would ask of God. The thing that we're afraid to ask God for, or the thing that is beyond our understanding of believing that God would actually do. God says, you watch what I'm going to do. God says, you watch what I'm going to do. I can look out upon this congregation today, and I can look at the faces that are in this congregation today. And there were times when we all would say, I wouldn't believe that we would be at the position that we're at. I wouldn't even dare ask that God would have brought us to this place. But I can look at the faces, and I can look at the people in this congregation, and I can say that God has done way beyond anything that I would dare ask of Him. He has brought us to a place, and He has done things in our lives that are way beyond what we could have asked of Him. I would not have dreamed that God would have done what God is doing. I would have not expected it. I would not dared ask it, but God has done it in our life. There are times in our life where we stand face to face with that which seems impossible to us. Situations and circumstances that are beyond our capability. We don't even have a hope for a cure. You gave up hope in your marriage. You've lost anything that would seem as a semblance of normality to you. Life to you is no longer anything that you enjoy. You face this life and you look out upon it and you want God to help you, but you're afraid to ask Him of doing anything. God, can you even help me in this situation? Can you even do anything for me? God, can you heal my body of this disease? God, can you remove the issue from my life? God, can you put back the pieces together of my broken life again? What you're hoping for, what you're asking of God is the simple relief, some kind of you're just asking God, can I please God? Can I just wake up in the morning and not feel like I want to die? God, can I just get through the day, somehow make it through the day and not feel like I hate myself and I hate my life? God, could I please just get through the day today? There was a time, Brother Mitchell, when all you could think about was how you could get through the day, how you could make it through the day without dying. There are times, God, that are in our lives, each and every one of us, when all that it just seems like the storm clouds are so strong and the things in our life are so destitute. And all we could ask for is, God, could I please just have a glimmer of light? Could I just have a smile? I'm not asking that everything go away, God, but could I just have for a moment of peace, just a day of peace, oh God, just an hour of peace where I didn't hate and I didn't feel full of anger and I didn't feel full of stuff that's inside of me. There are people that just, that's all they want out of life. That's all that they could dare ask of God. If they could just whittle God down, God, I'm not asking you for all of I just want this. If you could just give me this, if you could just give me a day where the pain wasn't so bad, where the pain didn't kill me, where I wasn't sick every day. If you could just give me that, God, I would be happy. And we're afraid to ask God, God, could you give me this kind of life? Could you give me these kind of things? You know why? Because we're even afraid to dream that. We're afraid to even dream something like that. Our dreams have been crushed. Our hope has been mutilated. Everything about what we wanted or what we dreamed that would ever happen in our life have been so crushed. As children, they grow up, and people around us and the people that we work around and the people that are in the grocery stores, in our schools and on our jobs, all around us, there are people that are going through life that has just been completely destroyed. They don't have hope. Their marriage is in shambles. Things are just absolutely destitute. They have lost everything it seems in life, and they have no hope. They wouldn't even dare ask of God that He would be able to do the things that they really desire for Him to do. The one thing that they could even ask of God is just for a little bit of peace. But my friend, let me tell you something. The place that you draw the line in the sand, the place that you won't go beyond with God, is a place that God will begin to work in your life. You asked Him for just a day of hope. Let me tell you what happens when you turn your life over to Jesus Christ. I'm not talking just come into a church and just sit down, just hear the preaching, clap the hands, and go home. I'm talking about when you make a commitment in your heart and when you make a commitment in your life and you're going to walk with Him. Abraham did not learn this by staying in the place that God called him out of. He had to follow God. He had to obey what God said of him. He had to go where God wanted him to go. And through that he learned. And that's what I'm telling you today, is the place where you draw the line in the sand. That's the place that God is going to work the miracles in your life. He's going to do the things for you that you never dreamed that God could do in your life. But it takes a commitment to Him. It takes an obedience to Him. It takes turning your heart wholeheartedly over to Him. And when you do that, my friend, the marriage that is broken can be put back together. It can happen. It can happen. God can heal a broken marriage. God can put two people back together that have hated each other for years, that have been at odds with each other for years. God can put them back together in a marriage that is full of love and full of mercy and full of grace and full of forgiveness. God can do that. God can do that, but you got to turn your heart over to Him. You've got to put your spirit into His hands. God can take somebody that has lost all of their hope and all of their dreams because everything has been shattered, and God can take that one person. I think about Sister Stacy up in Anchorage, a young lady that had her life completely obliterated by this world, and she was headed down a one-way road to hell, but God got a hold of her, and you would have never dreamed that this young lady, who was nothing more than a gangbanger, would have wound up with a minister's license preaching this gospel, how would she even dare ask that? Would she even dare come before anybody and say, I'm going to hold a license to be a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Would she even dream to do that? No, it started with, God, I am sick of this life. I am tired of what is going on. I don't even ask about that. I'm just asking, God, would you help me with the one pain that is in my life right now? That's all I want out of you. But where you draw the line, oh my goodness, what God can do with you, what God can minister in your life, and what God can make happen for you. You're afraid to ask God of these things. Don't be afraid. Dream what God has for you. Hope what God has for you. Put faith into the things that God has for you. Put faith in the things that God has for this church. Put faith in the things that God wants for this place. I look about this place today and I don't see a multitude of faces, but I'm not afraid to ask God for the entire city. I'm not afraid. I won't draw the line in the sand and say, God, just 100. God, just 200. God, just 300. I am believing God for the multitude of people. I am not asking God, would you just heal a headache? God, would you just take away a little bit of an upset tummy? Would you just heal a broken toe? Would you just do the small things, God? I'm not asking for that. God, I want the dead to rise. I want the ears to come open. I want the blind eyes to happen. God, I want it to happen. I'm not afraid to ask God of that in this city. I'm not afraid to ask God that there would be missionaries and ministers' wives and all kinds of people that would come out of this church that would go forth into the field and reap a harvest for His kingdom. I'm not afraid to ask God of that. And church, you cannot be afraid to ask God for the things in your life. Who's the loved one that you just think God will never reach? If you were to whittle God down in your family and you were to say, okay, God, I think you can reach this one. And God, I think you can reach that one. And God, I think you can go down. But when we get to this level right here, God, I just don't know that I want to push you beyond this point, God. I just don't know that I want to ask beyond this level of people right here, because I know what their life is like, and I know how much they hate you, and I know how much they hate me, and I know how much they hate this gospel. We're just not willing to go to that level, my friend, where you stop. Where you say, God, I just don't think. God said, you watch what I'm going to do. You watch what I'm going to do. You watch what I'm going to do. If you had known me as a young man, you wouldn't dream I'd be standing here today. If you'd have known me, if you'd have known my wife, you wouldn't believe that she'd be sitting here. She spent countless nights in a car parked out inside the bar at BJ's or the Bear Den or whatever it was at that time, at the Maverick Club. Her mom and dad raised her in front of a bar. And when they were old enough to stay home so that they could call the bar and tell mom and dad that they needed them to come home, that's when they got to stay home. You wouldn't have dreamed that she'd be standing here. I wouldn't have dreamed that Mary Irene, if I'd have met you when you were in your 20s, or Aaron in your 30s, I wouldn't have dreamed. I wouldn't have dreamed, Scott, if I'd have met you on the racetrack when you were 16 years old. I wouldn't have dreamed it. But what is God doing here? What is God ministering in your life about? What are you afraid to dream of God in your life? Because God's about to do a great thing in this city, in this church, among these people. Could we stand?